Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizzeri, and I do the research, and I share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends. This week, we'll be finally closing the book on the 1996 PC game Harvester. As I alluded to last time, we're doing something a little different for this episode. Instead of a deep dive, we're closing the book on Harvester with a great conversation with Aarno Malin. I've referenced Aarno a bunch of times in our Harvester episodes. He probably knows more about Harvester than pretty much anyone else online. He runs the channel Lodge Level 4 and hosts the Harvester Show. So if you ever wanted to know a lot about the inner workings of the game Harvester, he's the best person to check out. He also runs the Harvester Facebook page, where he shares tons of inside information, including promotional materials and interviews with people who are directly connected with the creation of this game. Aarno graciously met with me, and we had a really fun conversation about his experience with the game and some insights into some of the people who made it. So without further ado, let's get at the interview.
Aarno, thank you so much for meeting with me. So my first question was, you've become kind of the foremost expert on Harvester on the internet now, and I relied a lot on your really amazing interviews with people who were directly involved with this game. I'm really curious, what was your first experience with Harvester?
My first experience was in October 1996, and there was a review of Harvester in a Finnish gaming mag called Pelit, which means games. I read the review and I was in love with the game at that point already, because the guy who wrote the review, he was in shock because the game was so, shocking. But at the same time, he said that it's really a great game. It's well done. And that was a really interesting combination. And I thought that I just have to get that game. And I called to some gaming store, and I asked the guy there that, do you have the European version or the American version? I need the American version. Well, of course, he said to me that, yeah, we have the American version. Sure. So soon the mailman brought me that game, and I figured out that it was really a European version. So I had to track down the American version, which was not easy in Finland in 1996. But finally I managed to get that in my hands, and then I was happy. I played the game through again, and after that I've played it through maybe 20 times. But that was my first experience, and it blew my mind. The game was something I had never experienced before.
What do you think drew you to it? What things do you think stuck out that made you really connect with it?
Well, of course, it was really shocking and surprising, but it was so much more. I had never felt so many emotions with any game before. Different emotions. I fell in love with Stephanie, and then I wanted to protect her, so I lied to her, and I felt fear and excitement, and it was so amazing experience. And then I was blown away by the script and the music and the voice acting and everything. It felt such a perfect combination of, I don't know how to explain it better, but it was just something totally unique, and I loved it.
Yeah, it's definitely, and we talked about this in our episodes, there's not quite any games like Harvester. It's definitely unique. I guess that kind of segues well into my next question. What inspired you then to create Lodge Level 4 and the Harvester Show and your Facebook page about Harvester?
Well, actually, I started to track down the people who created Harvester maybe in 2005 or 2006. But back then, it was pretty difficult because internet was not the place it is now. The world wasn't so small back then. So actually, I managed to track down the actress of Stephanie, Lisa Kangelasi, maybe in 2007. She was working in some company, and then when I wrote to her, I wrote an email to her, but at that point, she wasn't working in that company anymore, and I lost her. But then in 2008, I joined Facebook, and that actually changed everything because from Facebook, I started to find those people, although many of them had slightly different names there, but I started to create connections, and in 2011, I realized that launching a fan page for Harvester is something I really want to do. I want to gather all Harvester fans around the world together, and I want to collect all Harvester stuff to my fan page, and I want to share it with everyone. And at that point, I had created quite many connections already, and I was working on many interviews. And well, the Harvester show that, Mike Napoleano, one of the main designers of Harvester, shipped me a big box full of stuff that was used for designing Harvester, like the script. And I thought that I have to share this all with Harvester fans, and maybe the best way to do that would be a YouTube show. And that's how the show got started.
That's got to be just very cool, especially as someone who's like a really big fan of the game, to all of a sudden have someone who's directly involved with it just mail you just a whole bunch of stuff directly related to it. And I know people can check out online you put on the Internet Archive Gil Austin's script from July 4th, 1994, and I've watched a bunch of your videos where you go through aspects of the script, and it's so fascinating how incredibly detailed he was. He thought a lot out, and he really had a big plan for this game, which I think is very interesting. And I think you really do a great job of sharing some of the insights into the process of this particular game.
The script especially, it's a work of a genius. And I've been so excited to have the possibility to read the original script. So of course I wanted to share my excitement with all the others. And finally I was able to release the script. I just want to share my happiness with other people who can also enjoy about that.
You definitely show a lot of passion for it. And one thing I'd love to ask any researcher, anybody who geeks out over, any topic in video games, like what was the thing that excited you the most during your research? Like what was like maybe something really cool that you came across that was like, wow, I need to share this with people?
Well, I already mentioned the script, and there's an enormous amount of dialogue in Harvester, and I don't have the script that wears all that dialogue, but it still amazes me that a game that was released in 1996 had that huge amount of dialogue. And the town of Harvest is a place where when you interact with someone, then it affects to other people too. It amazes me how full of life that little town of Harvest is. But then the amount of work in general is remarkable because there has been work behind everything that, for example, the player character Steve, for example, if I remember correctly, there are more than 2,200 of pictures of Steve, when he moves and fights and does different things. And it's amazing. When you play Harvester, you most likely won't see, well, if you can see half of that, that's good, because there's so much work behind the game that you probably will never see. That's what's been so interesting to see, that they really did put an effort into that game.
And I know you revealed in your show some of the stuff that got cut out. I know we were talking before I started recording about Mr. Pastorelli, the barber, and you had put it out in your show that he actually had dialogue. And because I know in the final game he doesn't say anything. And I think was it you pointed out that he speaks to the player in Italian and he knows he's in a simulation, right?
Yeah. I mean, how cool idea is that? Wow.
And so you talked a bit about tracking these people down, which again, that could not have been an easy task. Not just because, as you said, the world's a lot smaller now before more interconnected social media, but also like a lot of these folks ended up not becoming really, household names as, actors or creators. Like I think of like Gil Austin. I know from your interviews, I kind of tried to track him down on IMDb. He has, I think, at least 2 pages. I think one is Gil Austin and one is GP Austin, I think, on there. So like maybe we'll focus on Gil Austin then. Like what was the process of trying to track this guy down, the sort of the person behind Harvester?
That was a really long process. And actually, I once tracked him down, when he was acting. What was the name of the clown? He was in some horror show acting some clown role. And just a second, I will remember it soon.
Sure. I remember you saying it was like a local public access Texas show, I think if I recall. It was like some sort of horror show that was based in Texas.
Yeah,
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with an addendum to this part. Arno asked me to let our listeners know that the show that Gil Austin starred as a horror clown on was the show Professor Griffin's Midnight Shadow Show, which, according to IMDb, was a late night horror movie show that aired on Austin, Texas's Channel 16 from 2001 to 2006. And Gil Austin played a character called Dan Dan. So, with that, back to the interview.
and well, because his role was a clown, well, he always had a mask on his face. I knew how Gil Austin looked like because he did the role of Mr. Moynihan in Harvester, and you can see his face on the Making of Harvester video, which came with the game. But I could never see the face of the clown. But then there was one small photo of the actor of that clown, and I realized he must be the Gil Austin I was looking for. He just didn't have hair and beard anymore. So I sent emails to all the addresses I could find that had something to do with the horror show, but I never got any reply. A few years later, I found some other stuff Gil Austin had created, and again I sent some emails, and finally he replied to me, and he said to me that, yeah, I'm the guy you are looking for. And he also told me that he really was that clown, and he had no idea why my emails were not forwarded to him. But then I finally was talking with my almost an idol, and he was very pleased about what I had done. He had no idea that Harvester had a cult following and fan base. And we wrote emails to each other, and we even had some plans together to do something. But then, maybe, was it 7 or 8 years ago, he suddenly didn't reply to my emails anymore. And I know that he hasn't been in any contact with some of his friends. And actually, no one knows anything about him anymore. He just disappeared 7 or 8 years ago. Some other main designers of Harvester, like Mike Napodano and Kevin Obregon, they have lost him too. No one knows where he is or if he is even alive anymore.
Wow. I know his credits on IMDb are pretty limited. And I think he's got like on one, he's got his movie he made, My Naked Villainy,
Yeah,
which of course was a number of years ago. And I found his, I don't know if you found this too, through the Wayback Machine on the Internet Archive. You can look at the old page, and he actually has a bunch of posts about how troubled a production it was. But that's interesting. I was going to ask about if you had kept track of Gil Austin. Yeah, so even for you and for people who have worked with him, it sounds like he's kind of fallen off the map.
yeah.
And that also kind of answers one of the other questions. That was, do you stay in touch with some of the other people who make it? So it sounds like you talk a bit with Kevin Obregon and Mike Napadano and Lisa Cangelosi and them.
Yeah, it's really nice to be in touch with them. And also, I have to mention programmer Dustin Nalf and artist Timothy Higgins, who did the role of the chess master in Harvester. I'm also in touch with him too. And sometimes Tracy Odell, who did the role of the dark exotic woman on the third level of the lodge. It's really great to be in touch with those people, and I hope that someday I even travel to Texas and meet all those great people. And also I have to mention Lisa Kangelosi, but I haven't been in touch with her in maybe few years, but in Facebook I always say happy birthday to her once a year, and hopefully I will meet her someday too.
As is the Facebook way. You post on somebody's wall on their birthday, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue a little bit into the game itself. So one thing that's really neat about reading about Gil Austin and Kevin Obregon, some of the people who developed the creative end of Harvester, is how they were really upfront about what they thought the message of this game was. That it was like they were going to take apart not just sort of like 1950s, like Leave It to Beaver style American conservatism, like your small town, your white picket fence, and all that, but also people's concerns over media violence and like the fact that Roadrunner cartoons are like one of the running themes of the game. I mean, I know in the ending where Steve chooses to become a harvester, that the last line of the game is in fact Roadrunner cartoons.
Yeah.
I would love to hear your thoughts on like as someone who's played the game a bunch, is like Gil Austin is very upfront about his messages, and I wanted to know how effective do you think he got his message across in Harvester?
Well, if you play the game through, then I'm pretty sure you will get the message, because in the end, the game reveals that the player character Steve has been in a simulator that's supposed to turn him into a serial killer. And then you, as a player, realize that you have been through everything that Steve's been through. And then there's the final decision in the game. Do you feel the lust for blood, or do you want to do the right thing? And it's a so great ending. It really makes you think and maybe question yourself. So I think at least at some level the message is clear, but to me it was more like trip into my own emotions and thoughts. To me it was something like that.
And something we talked about a little bit on our series on Harvester was how it kind of tapped into a really big talking point about violent video games in the US, because throughout the 1990s, there was a lot of concern that, video games were going to warp young people's minds somehow. And like in the early 90s, it was kind of a vague pointing to, well, it's probably going to desensitize them. They may start recreating that in real life. And then a couple years after Harvester happened, the Columbine shooting happening in 1999. And that gave, for people who were critical of games, it gave them a tangible thing. This is what video games cause. And in later episodes on our show, we're going to talk about how that's kind of nonsense. That kind of argument is not very true. But it's really interesting seeing Harvester as this game that comes out in that kind of midway point between when, for example, there's that panic over video games in the early 90s that led to them getting raided in the US in 93, 94. And then in 99, you have the Columbine shooting. And so it's really interesting seeing this game that's kind of like in a midpoint when people are talking about video game violence. And so that's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on your experiences. Very much it's one of the things I wish I did not know the twists going into it, because by the time I was doing my research, I kind of knew all of the beats. But I think it would have been very interesting to have played through all of that and got to that point. And so when we transition at least a little bit into going back to Harvester in 1996, and one thing about Harvester is like it never ended up being the kind of like one of those controversial video games you point back to. Like we think about like the common message about like Night Trap and Mortal Kombat is that they led to the panic in the US that led to video games getting age ratings, or like Postal in 1997, so a year after Harvester, and like the U.S. Postal Service getting upset, and U.S. Senator Joseph Lieberman getting upset over this game, and like getting them a whole bunch of attention. But so like when you're thinking about like 90s controversial video games, you think about Doom, you think about Mortal Kombat, you think about Postal, but you don't think about Harvester. It kind of became kind of just like an oddity that like I tried to argue is like people really didn't recognize it for what it is until much later with like the re-release with Night Dive and all that stuff. And so that's a long way of me asking is like, what's your take on why you think, as someone who's done a bunch of research into Harvester, why do you think it never really took off as like one of those big quotes violent video games that media watchdogs and politicians are warning us about, like that? What's your take on like why it didn't have that kind of impact?
Well, I guess that Harvester just isn't so well known. When Harvester was announced in 1994, it had a great hype. People seemed to be excited about that, and people talked about Harvester. But it took 2 more years until they released Harvester. And at that point, people, how do you say, people were bored about the whole subject. And it just, you know, people weren't interested in it anymore. And it didn't get the attention very much. And it was almost like forgotten soon after the release. It became popular again much later, thanks to me, by the way.
Yeah, why don't we talk about that for a minute? You talked about this in your video, how Night Dive, those who don't know Night Dive, they kind of revive and re-release a bunch of older games, everything from FMV games, like a bunch of digital pictures, things like Ground Zero Texas, to obscure shooters like the Turok series. As an aside, I love their remake of Turok 2. And you talked a little bit about how Night Dive reached out to you about getting some materials together for their re-release of Harvester in 2014. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, and actually at that time, someone from Steam was also in touch with me. So I knew that they were both going to re-release Harvester. And I was, you know, the version GOG re-released was the Night Dive version. And someone from GOG was in touch with me, and I had to be the expert who confirmed that the version they were going to release was the uncensored version. And they asked me some other stuff. I was the expert they wanted to use. And GOG, the way they thanked me was that they released the soundtrack of Harvester as a bonus content. And there, among the songs, there is a link to my Harvester fan page on Facebook. And the funny thing is that after that, Steam re-released Harvester and they copied the soundtrack straight from GOG. And that's why there's a link to my fan page also in the Steam version.
So Steam did not ask you about that. They just kind of took the GOG version, right?
Yeah, they didn't ask that, from no one. They just stole the soundtrack from the GOG version and released that as their own bonus content. But it's very nice because then there's a link to my fan page. I've had many messages where people tell that they have found my fan page because of that soundtrack. So I don't care.
I guess any publicity is good publicity, right?
Yeah.
How does that feel then? Like, I mean, you've talked about how like you first found this game in the 90s and like started the Harvester show, and now people are looking at you as an expert in its re-release and stuff. Like, how does that feel?
Well, it feels really great, and it's something I never expected actually to happen. When I started the Harvester show, I thought that I'm just the fan who is talking about Harvester, but soon I realized that now I have fans, and it kind of changed the whole situation, and suddenly I was part of that whole Harvester thing, and of course it felt great, and I'm really happy that I have had the opportunity to tell everything I know about Harvester to people. And one great thing among others is that I've become a character in a video game thanks to my Harvester show. There's actually a game company called Harvester Games that has released 5 point-and-click adventure games that are also horror games. And I've been a very big fan of this company. Their adventure games are spooky and dark, and they are very emotional and clever. I love those games. And their latest game is Burnhouse Lane that was released in December 2022. And I'm actually a character in that game. One of the characters, his name is Aarno, just like me. He is a Finnish journalist, just like me. He looks just like me, and I did the voice acting for him. So he is really me. And that's because the guy who is creating those games, who is leading the company, he is a fan of my Harvester show, and I'm a fan of his games. So that's how we became friends, and when he heard that it's been my lifelong dream to become a character in a video game, then he decided to make my dream come true.
While you were talking, I looked it up on Steam. It's, yeah, Burnhouse Lane here. So a couple of the other games they have are The Cat Lady, Doubtfall, Lorelei. That's very neat.
That's amazing. It's the best thing that happened to me in 2022. And it's been really great to watch, for example, YouTube playthroughs. And, you know, it's really nice to hear people talk about me and my character and how they react to everything I do. It's a really unique experience. You know, it's very hard to explain how it feels. That happened thanks to Harvester.
It is that weird situation where the observer becomes part of the subject. You know,
Yeah.
you're now part of the story.
My life is complete now.
All right, so we'll start wrapping up with a couple of small questions. Any future plans for the Harvester Show? I know you haven't posted in a little bit, but are there things you're hoping to share about the game that you haven't covered in an episode yet?
Yes, I think it's been more than 2 years since I posted a video. But yeah, in the beginning of this year, Mike Napodano, one of the main designers of Harvester, delivered me more than half an hour footage that's, you know, making of Harvester footage. It's behind the scenes footage. And it's, once again, I use the word mind-blowing. To a fan like me, it really is a mind-blowing stuff. And of course, I want to share it with everyone, but I want to do it the best way possible. And now I'm thinking, how should I do that? Because the lack of time has been my enemy. That's why there haven't been new videos in a few years. But now that I have all that amazing footage, I have to find a way to somehow publish that with the respect it deserves.
So if people want to learn more about Harvester, if people want to learn about you, where can they find info on you and your work?
Harvester fan page on Facebook is under the name Ludge Level 4. And also my YouTube channel is having the same name. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram also. And of course, you can send me messages if you want. I will always reply. I have maybe too many social media accounts and email addresses for different purposes. So that's why it's possible that I sometimes miss messages, but I will always reply to every message I see. So feel free to ask me anything.
Aarno, thank you so much for meeting for me. This was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin back in the editor's chair. And again, thank you so much to Aarno Malin for meeting with me and talking a whole bunch about Harvester. You can check out his content at a couple of different places. You can watch The Harvester Show, which has a lot of insights into the creation of Harvester and a whole bunch of great behind-the-scenes stuff at Aarno's channel, Lodge Level 4. You can also check out Aarno's Harvester Facebook fan page. I'll include links to that as well as Aarno's social in the description. I've also included a link to Burnhouse Lane, developed by Harvester Games. And with that, that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Sequi by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or an idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizzeri. Thanks again one more time to Aarno Malin. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal. And always remember, subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube.